Hey everyone, it's Geoff and Lauren here. We run a website called Discoverable Bass, and if you want to learn more about the instrument, take some lessons, check out what we're doing over there, please go and visit the website after this question. And the question is from Scarlett, and Lauren, it's one that I think you're definitely more qualified to answer than me. And it's, hi Geoff and Lauren, my question is, how do you deal with transportation in the airport if you need to be playing in another country or state? And I'll just jump in here first with my experience, Lauren, is that every time that I played overseas, I've always rented a bass. Just in terms of flying with an instrument, it's just, I've never found a way that I thought it would make it even remotely practical in terms of budget, in terms of, I mean, one of the things that we'll talk about in a second, obviously, is flight cases, hard cases, is that one of the big problems with them is when you're not flying with them, they take up so much room. And we already play the double bass, which fills our houses with stuff anyway. And then you end up living next to this huge, giant flight case for the next 6 months. And so most people don't even want to own one. You can rent one, but, you know, it really is tricky. So my first bit of advice is to rent. And there is a website, which I forget the name, but it's called something like Rent a Bass, that provides instruments all over the world. And I'll, share a link with that below. But Lauren, you're in Australia at the minute. Tell us about your trip over here. How did you find flying with a bass? You've actually done it.
It was terrible. It's always terrible. You talk to anybody and it's always terrible. So I've recently moved to Australia from the US, and getting my bass over here was a bit of a thing. And when I finally got it over here, what I had to do was I flew back home for the holidays. And I borrowed a friend's flight case to take my bass back. And you would think, like, just actually maneuvering with the thing is tough enough, because it's just enormous. It's like something crazy, like 7.5 feet tall. So it's just insane. So you have to find like the right car to take you to the airport.
Yeah, well, that's
that's
the first thing, like the car, and you need that at both ends. It's not like you can turn up to where you're going and then just hail a taxi when you've got this,
Exactly. So there's so much that goes into it, and like, even just like practicing, like moving the thing is something you need to do. But also, don't do what I did and just assume that because you've flown with an airline that has transported your bass before, that it'll happen again. Because what happened with me was I was flying Delta, and I know a lot of people have horror stories about Delta with instruments, but they've done it with me before, and so I felt like it was a safe bet. But when you're flying super far and you have a connecting flight that, basically the last leg of my trip was from Sydney to Melbourne, and I was going on via Australia. And they have different rules, and I did not check those rules. And so I ended up not being able to actually make my flight from Sydney to Melbourne. And the people at the help desk at Delta actually had to lie about the weight of my bass, because that was the issue. Or else I would have just not made it back.
Do you know how much
it
weighed in the flight case?
Yeah, I do, actually. It was 93 pounds. I know.
That's absolutely brutal.
It's insane. But like, my bass is something stupid like 20 pounds, So it was the case, but it was also that I had just wrapped it with a bunch of towels and a bunch of padding just to make sure that it was okay. But the limit on Delta is 100 pounds, while the limit on the Australia was 50, I think. And so the size was fine, but it was just the weight.
Because if you're doing something like you're flying, you've got a short haul flight in the States, and then you do the transatlantic one. The transatlantic one, you'll probably be okay because it's a big plane, or I guess. But then the little, leg of your journey, which is the hour at the other end, that.
You just want to make sure, like, and even, I thought about calling ahead of time to see, and I didn't, and I kicked myself for it. But you just want to make sure that the airline will handle it. And a really trusty airline in the States, at least, is Southwest. Southwest has always been great. Delta will do it, but there have been a lot of incidents with Delta just completely wrecking bases, particularly in the Atlanta airport, which is terrifying because that's where I was coming out of.
They hate bases there.
They'll just, like, there were so many that I saw last year, particularly last couple years, where bases were just demolished, like at the Atlanta airport. Does
Go on,
No,
go
sorry,
on.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that to damage a double bass in a flight case is actually quite
That's a
hard
lot.
because
That's
it just
like you have to really try.
yeah. I mean, if you're in a room, you've got. I mean, even just tipping it over is actually like quite a big thing. And
Yeah.
if it rolled over on its
Yeah.
side, it wouldn't probably damage the instrument. It's like you really have to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
go out of your way. So good
Well,
work
and it's
for surviving it.
something to sort of remember though is that my friend that I borrowed the case from, a good friend named Adam Bernstein, who's in Atlanta,
Yeah.
was telling me, he was lending me the David Gage flight case, which is excellent. It's
Yeah.
just like it just looks like a tank and it feels like a tank.
Yeah.
And he was telling me that even when he travels with his bass, which fits pretty snug in the case, he'll wrap it with towels and extra padding just to make sure it doesn't move. And my bass, is a lot smaller than most, and so I was really worried about that. But that's why I padded it so much. And really, it's not always about the case being damaged. It's about like the bass sort of knocking against something else. So if you can eliminate the movement, as much as you can, then that's helpful. But all this to say is that if it's a performance that you can get away with playing on another bass, then just don't do it. Just don't do it at all. I mean, when I'm playing my solo stuff, where I need to be on a familiar instrument, I'm a little hesitant to borrow a bass, but otherwise,
the only thing that makes me think that sometimes I might be like over cautious about it is that when you go to the ISB conferences or that kind of thing, there's so many people there with instruments, and I think a lot of them will have driven actually, and like just done a massive 3-day drive to avoid the hassle. But there'll be a lot of guys out there who will have actually had to fly with their instruments, and I had people that lived in different countries that studied over at the college that I was at. There was a great bass player called Clint Sevchek who was studying, and he had a gorgeous bass as well, and he flew from the US, and I don't know.
Well, that's like Jeff Raditich, Jeff flies with his is it a Guadagnini? Yeah, it's a Guadagnini that he flies with. And it's like a tank of an instrument, but still, that's terrifying.
And Edgar Meyer's bass, every time I see Edgar Meyer playing, he's always using that same instrument.
But you know what? Edgar has a different setup because he takes it with him on the plane. He buys an extra, well, I don't think he buys the extra ticket, but he buys 2 first-class tickets, one for him and one for his bass. So when we become millionaires, Geoff, then we'll be able to. But another thing, one last thing that you might want to consider if you're doing a lot of flying is to invest in a bass that has a removable neck, or even consider maybe doing that removable neck surgery. I've had a few friends that have done that, and they really are happy with it. And it just makes it so much simpler. So.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's really, really good advice. And, there are other options, like you've used the Chadwick folding bass, I know, before. And there are a lot of different options out there for us now to get around this. But it's, you sometimes get new bass players as well who sometimes think that they maybe need a hard case just to transport the bass to gigs and things, and essentially it's just
don't do that.
Soft case. So listen, Scarlett, if you do have to fly, best of luck to you. Get in there and just argue with the guys on the council and do your best like Lauren did, and I'm sure that you'll make it happen. Thanks for sharing that story with us, Lauren. It's been really cool. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to leave your own question for us to answer in a future episode, you can do so by leaving a comment below, and we'll see you next time.